What's up, guys? So the Candidates Tournament 2022 is now underway. Actually, it started yesterday, and round 2 is currently happening right now as I record this video. Put a poll on the channel, and the interest was higher than I was expecting in doing some of these candidate game recaps. So I will be covering some of these games over the next about 2 weeks or so. So we're going to put everything else on hold just temporarily, and then we'll be back with the regular kind of videos after this tournament ends. Now, for those of you who don't know what this is basically some of the best players in the world compete for a chance to play against Magnus for the World Championship title. You have to qualify for this tournament, so even just being in this tournament, it's kind of a big deal. It's not easy to get in here. If we scroll down, you'll see right here, these are the players who have qualified, and it lists the qualification method. So how did they qualify? Jan was runner-up last year, so you automatically qualified because of that. A lot of them, they have to win certain tournaments. So the top 2 finishers in these tournaments qualify. Interesting story about Ding. So Karjakan, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but he was already qualified, and then because of some political statement was actually disqualified, and so they took Ding, who was like the highest rated player on, I think, the May supplement. And so he actually gets kind of thrown in at the last minute, I guess. And so kind of interesting there. We've got Ali Riza, 19 years old. So the youngest player. I mean, everybody in this tournament is really, really strong. You look at these ratings, 27 and 2800. Should be pretty interesting. Let's talk about the format. So it's a 14-round tournament, double round robin. So double round robin means you're going to play everybody in the tournament 2 times, once with white and once with black. And this is actually quite different from most of the tournaments that you or I would go to. Normally, like when I go to a tournament, I don't know who I'm going to play until the tournament starts or a few minutes before the round, right? And if I win, I'm going to play other people who win. If I lose, I'm going to play other people who lose. This tournament, they know the pairings ahead of time. So what that means is there's a lot of preparation and trying to figure out, okay, what do I think my opponent's going to play? And by the way, all of these players, you know, their games are followed widely. Everybody knows what they play normally. And so there's this whole game of, are they going to play something different? If so, what's it going to be? I wonder if I can figure that out and prepare a line for it. And it's almost like a game within a game, right? Because sometimes you can, if you walk into the preparation of your opponent at this level, you might just lose the game immediately because they've already studied like all of the lines that Stockfish recommends. And if you haven't studied that, you're going to be at a massive disadvantage. So that's something to keep an eye out for. And then also, if we go down and talk about the time controls, which are right here, 120 minutes for the first 40 moves, 60 minutes for the next 20 moves, 15 minutes for the rest of the game. So this is pretty standard where you have a certain amount of time for the first couple of moves, and then after you complete those moves, so after you make the 40th move, you would get an extra 60 minutes. The interesting thing here is that this 30-second increment starts on move 61. So there's no increment prior to that, which is, I would say, kind of weird. I don't know if that's normal or not, but most of these, or I would say a lot of these big tournaments like this have increment early. And so it'll be interesting to see if time pressure plays a role in some of these games, because 61 moves is a lot, right? Like the games could very well end before move 60. Okay, it's a very long game that lasts past 60 moves. So I'll be interested to see how that works out. And yeah, having said that, we're going to look at some of the games. I'm going to be focusing on wins and losses, and probably not too many of the draws unless they are very interesting. And of course, this is a channel where you guys are trying to learn how to become better at chess. So I'm going to be focusing on key takeaways in each of the games that I think will benefit you guys as players. All right, and real quick, before we jump into the game, if you notice on the board behind me, D4 has been played. So you guys voted in the last video in the comments, and I counted them up. I looked at the upvotes, and it seemed like D4 was the more popular move. So I have responded with knight to F6. It's now your turn again. Like last time, vote in the comments below. Whichever move I see happening the most, or whichever one gets upvoted the most, I'll play it, and we'll just kind of keep this game going. All right, having said that, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the games from round 1. I'm going to try to catch up And then, like I said, round 2 is being played right now. So we'll talk about that in the next video. All right, so first game I want to show you is Ding Liren with white against Jan Nepomniachtchi as black. Here we go. We get an English opening, which I'm not an expert on the English, so I'm not going to even pretend to be. I do want to mention this move right here. Queen takes d5. So as a beginner, one of the things that you're taught is don't bring out your queen too early, right? And yet here we see Jan hasn't developed a single other piece bringing out the queen. So what's going on? Well, one of the reasons why you don't want to bring out your queen too early a lot of the times is because it's going to get attacked by your opponent's pieces and you're going to lose a bunch of time. In this case, the queen is actually attacking the knight. So black's not losing time immediately. It's actually white who has to spend time moving the knight. And then the other thing is, after the next couple of moves, we see now knight c3, the queen has to move. But queen to e5 is actually a nice square that's kind of protected by this pawn on e4. See, normally if you put your queen on e5, like let's just, for example, let's just say we have this Scandinavian. White plays knight c3, you have to move your queen. If you put it on e5, well, now I can play bishop to e2, and next move I'm going to play knight f3, and you're wasting a lot of time moving your queen around, right? If we go back to the game here, and we compare, let's see, this position, well, there's no knight f3 to chase your queen away, and even if white tried to play something like d4 or f4, this pawn on e4 is going to be able to en passant, right? So for example, and it kind of protects the queen in a sense. So that's a key difference. And if you can actually get your queen in the center of the board like this, a lot of times it can be a nice square for the queen because it's controlling so many central squares, right? The queen is doing a lot here. So that's something just to kind of keep in mind. There are exceptions to those general principles, right? And obviously, you know, these grandmasters, super grandmasters know when it's okay to break those principles, right? So bishop g2. Here again, normally speaking, you don't want to be developing your knights to the edge of the board. But in this case, you can't go to c6. And if you go to d7, what's the problem with that? Well, you're blocking your bishop from developing. And so in this case, knight to a6 actually does make some sense. Another reason why knight a6 a lot of times is bad is because the bishop could capture it and force you to have some double isolated pawns. In this case, that's not a problem. And we're going to see this move later on actually maybe had a point even now. So let's keep going. Castles. We get some kind of developing moves. And one thing that I want to point out about this position that's kind of weird is white hasn't moved a single center pawn, which, you know, normally in chess, you start the game with one of these pawns, right? And even if you do play the English, a lot of times you follow it up with one of these pawns later. But in this game, both of these pawns are still sitting back here, which is kind of weird, at least in my opinion. So knight to g4. Bishop to b2 and queen to h5. Now, this is actually checkmate in one move. And you might say, well, what is he like trying to just win the game? Like thinking that Ding isn't going to see that? No, that's obviously not what's going on. Of course, he knows Ding is going to stop the checkmate. But there's more going on here than just that. And so what I want you to pay attention to is, how does Ding prevent this? Well, he plays h4. Now, what do we know about moving pawns in front of our king? Well, they create weaknesses, right? And we're going to come back to this move later on, but you're going to see how this actually becomes a target or a point of attack for Jan to use later in the game. And so, you know, you might say, oh, he was just threatening checkmate in one. Well, it's actually more than that. He's trying to induce some kind of a weakness, right? Even if h3 is played, well, then there's knight takes e3, and guess what? Now there's the bishop and queen lined up over here, right? So, however, you know, Ding wanted to defend it, there was going to be a weakness. Now, probably the best thing that Ding could have done was just take it. Now, it does develop Jan's bishop for him, but at least there's no major weaknesses created by moving the pawns forward. So that would have been probably something to consider. But anyway, queen h5, h4, bishop to f6. And after queen c2, it kind of looks like white is really trying to attack that pawn and take it. But after this trade in bishop to f5, white can't take the pawn because there's this trade over here of bishops, which draws the queen away. And now white doesn't actually have enough pieces to defend on e4. Okay, so it's kind of a weird position for white because this pawn is really annoying. It's blocking both of these doubled pawns. It's just kind of jamming up, you know, white's bishop. And yet it's hard to kind of figure out how to deal with that, right? All right, so Ding plays knight to a4. You know, one of the rules, if you're kind of in a cramped or sort of jammed up position. A lot of times trading pieces can free things up. And so I believe that might be what Ding was thinking here. Let's go ahead and try to trade some of these pieces off and see if it can open up the game a little bit. And now we see knight to c7. So remember that knight on a6. Now it's going to d5. And this is something you definitely want to remember with your knights, okay? You always want to look for the best square on the board. Usually it's an outpost, and usually it's a place that can't be attacked by your opponent's pawn. So on d5, there's no white pawns that can attack that knight, right? This guy is doing a great job of shutting these down, and the c pawn is gone. So it's going to be very, very, very difficult for white to figure out how to deal with that knight on d5. All right, so knight to c4. And here we go. This knight is completely shutting down white's counterplay, and it's very clear what black is going to do. This rook's going to come over somewhere, you know, put pressure on the king. This rook's probably going to come over and up as well. And I don't know how white's going to get through. Like, this knight is just super annoying. And so we can see that's exactly what happened in the game. Black is just orchestrating an attack on the king, and white is having a hard time really doing anything. So Ding tries to go over here and make, you know, something happen, but at this point it's already looking very bad for black. Rook to f6 attacking here. King goes back to g1 and now g5. Okay, you remember earlier, right? Way earlier when Jan sort of induced this move of h4. Well, now you can see it's a target, right? And it's leading to a way that black can open up this file and get to the king very easily. Okay, so there's just not really enough time for this. Although that being said, even now, it's not a great position. Stockfish is saying b5 is somehow a better move, but it's kind of a complicated position. But what it comes down to is white's king is in trouble, and the pieces are just all misplaced and not really able to help the king, right? And so here we go, h3. Ding tries to kind of mix it up. If he would have just retreated, the pawn's going to push forward. There's no good option for white. If the king goes up, then obviously black gets a second queen and it's game over. If the king goes over, then the rook comes down. Bad news for white. And then also on bishop to h1, same kind of thing. h2 check. After here, the queen's going to come over. Lots of threats that, you know, white just can't really deal with everything. So unfortunately, at this point, it's pretty much over already. Like I said, Ding tried to mix it up, but there's a nice little move here. This is a checkmate threat. If he tries to take it, this also leads to mate. There's takes, queen h2, king f1, and then bishop to h3. And there's your checkmate. Okay, so only move was to try something else by pushing this pawn forward. There is a mate in 12 already here, and it starts with this long kind of line. Takes the rook, takes the pawn, sacrifices the bishop. And this is where Ding resigned. The point is that if he tries to take the bishop, queen's coming back over, which forces the king out. h5 again forces the king up, and there's mate in 6 from here. Starts with queen h3, and the point is that white can't actually deal with this threat. Has to just throw in some random checks with some of these other pieces just to delay the game, but it's over. So Jan wins round 1 with black. And by the way, I should mention that is a very big achievement. A lot of times in these top level tournaments, the strategy is kind of win with white and draw with black. And if you can do that, you're doing very well. Like, most players at this level consider draw with black to be great. Like, that's a success. Okay, so when you win with black, that is huge. I mean, that is a massive victory. And at the same time, for Ding, that's a really tough loss, right? Because if you're not even getting a draw with white, it's going to be very difficult to come back and win with black, okay? And, you know, at the lower levels, color doesn't matter nearly as much. You can create all kinds of winning chances with black. But at the top level like this, it's much more difficult to do. So that's what makes this game even more impressive, all right? So that's the first game. And now let's jump over and look at the next one. All right, next up we have Fabiano Caruana versus Hikaru Nakamura. Let's jump right in. So we get a Rui Lopez and the Berlin defense. Okay, this is regarded by most people as one of black's strongest and most solid responses to the Rui Lopez. It's just very solid. It's been tested a lot at the top level, and black does very well and in a lot of cases holds draws. And so Nice choice. The main line here is actually to castle, allow black to take on e4. You play d4 to kind of try to open up the center, and then usually black will drop the knight back to d6. And after a bunch of trades, you get this kind of endgame, which looks pretty pleasant for white because black has lost castling rights. You've got 4 against 3 pawn majority on the king side, but black does have the bishop pair, and black doesn't really have any weaknesses in the position that you can attack. Like if you're playing with white, what are you going to attack in this position? There's not a lot. I mean, yeah, you can create a simple threat here, but it's very easy for black to slide the king over, defend that. You don't have your light squared bishop to follow it up with. Black's going to just simply kind of develop their bishops, bring the rooks to the open file, and it's very difficult for white to win these kind of games, right? And so that's why the Berlin is such a solid opening for black. Now, Fabiano played instead of castling, played d3, so we get this different type of position. So bishop c5, he does trade the bishop for the knight right away, and then knight b to d2, castles, knight to b3. Now, if you notice the time, 159 to 158. So up until this point, both players have not used much time at all. Okay, but right here, check out Hikaru's time from 159 to 147. So he thought a lot before playing queen to e7. So what does that tell us? Well, I don't know. Obviously, I wasn't there, and I don't know what he's thinking. But usually, when a player thinks that long this early in the game, it means that they've been surprised by a move. And so Fabiano maybe prepared this and Hikaru wasn't expecting it. The main moves played in this position are like b3 and d4. And so maybe he was kind of preparing for these and didn't really consider knight b3. I don't know, but that's just something to keep in mind. So queen e7 is played. Now knight to a5, which is at first glance, it's kind of like, what's going on here? It's a very interesting move, attacking the pawn, and hasn't really been played often. Castling queenside looks like an extremely logical move. And I believe I remember Hikaru after the game saying something about he intentionally played this move, which he knew like wasn't as good as castling, just because he wanted to avoid some preparation that Fabiano may have had. And so this is a good point, going back to what I mentioned earlier. Like, let's just say Fabiano had looked at this move, knight a5, had studied it with Stockfish, had expected castling, and he had, maybe Stockfish's next 5 or 10 moves memorized on exactly what he was going to play, what the plan was going to be after Hikaru castled. If that's true, then Hikaru maybe made a really great decision by playing a move like rook b8, even if it is, let's just say, not the best move, because if he avoids all of that preparation, probably in the end, it's a good choice. And so these are the kind of things that go on at this level that, like I said, you and I probably don't really need to think about in most of our games. So let's keep going. Bishop to g5, h6, g5, so very aggressive, but he hasn't castled there, and so it kind of makes sense. And since white's king is here, it looks like you could launch an attack, and so I like these moves. I like to play chess this way. d4, so this is an important thing to keep in mind. Generally speaking, when somebody is attacking you on the side of the board, the best way to respond is with a counterattack in the center. And that's exactly what we see here. See, if you don't do anything and you just kind of sit around and like maybe you slide your rooks around and you move your knight back, black's going to like start pushing these pawns some more. And guess what? They're going to get a nice attack and you're not going to really have any compensation for it. So what Fabiano is doing is saying, no, I'm not going to sit around and wait for you to push all these pawns. I'm going to create an attack in the center because that's where your king is. If I can open up, get rid of some of these pawns, maybe at some point my rook can come over. I can get my own counter attack while you're attacking me over here, right? So that's what's going on here. f6, queen to d3. Here come the pawns on the king side, right? And so we get some trades trying to kind of open up the center. And it's interesting, we have 2 bishops against 2 knights. Now, a lot of the times, the 2 bishops is going to be better than the 2 knights. In this case, the position is not super open, right? The bishops don't have, let's just say complete control of the board, like sometimes they can. This one's pretty good, I will say that. But this guy on d6 is kind of like, yeah, it's not doing a whole lot. The other thing is black's king is not as safe as white's king, right? So it's kind of a balance. Stockfish thinks the position is pretty equal. We get knight to c4, and there one of the bishops gets traded off, which is interesting because, normally when I look at a position like this, I'm thinking, okay, this bishop's not doing a whole lot. Do I really want to trade my knight for that? But at the same time, you can say, well, the knight over here on a5, I don't know what that's really doing either. And so both of these pieces are kind of not awesome, I guess. So these get traded. Queen comes over. And let's just jump ahead. A lot of stuff happened. This, I remember Hikaru was saying, was kind of a crucial moment in the game and turned out to be the wrong decision, putting his king in a place where it actually could get attacked. And it had to do with this move f3, which I believe he said he didn't really calculate. And so, you know, if you think about, let's just say black would have just continued attacking, right? Like, I don't know, rook g8, getting ready to just kind of push these pawns. I'm not sure what white's plan was going to be, but it looks like black's going to get a nice attack on the game. As it was, after castling, it turns out a few moves later, and all of a sudden it's white who's getting the attack on black's king. And right now it's kind of like, doesn't really look like it, but watch what happens over the next couple moves. We get this trade. Here's an attack on the pawn. So e4 to try to shut down that. The rooks get traded. And very quickly, you're going to notice this knight becomes a monster, right? And this is something that I think you guys should keep in mind. At this point, it's kind of like, well, what's my knight even doing? I can go here, but there's the bishop. I can't take this because it's defended, and I'll just lose my knight and queen if I do that. So what am I going to do? Well, Fabiano just says, well, let's just relocate it to a better place, right? And so watch what happens. We got some dancing around here with the queens. I don't want to get into everything. I just want you to kind of pay attention to this knight. Notice how knight to f5 now is a serious threat. And again, we get some dancing around with the queens. And again, look at this. The knight is getting ready to hop into f5. And on f5, I mean, look at this. You're getting all sorts of forks and checkmate threats. And it's a very complicated game. I don't want to like get into all the details because, yeah, it's... And also, sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier, but look at their time, right? They're getting low on time. And remember, we're not at move 6. We're not even close to move 60, which means there's no increment. So this is kind of like a blitz game at this point, right? Which is interesting because in a lot of these tournaments, you would have that 30-second increment. In this case, they don't. And so they have to play quickly. And some blunders were made by both sides here. But ultimately, we get, let's see, where is it at? This position here where there's just too many forks. Okay, so knight f5. So there's an attack on the queen. If the bishop tries to take, the queen is coming down, forking these guys, so that's not an option. If, let's see what was played in the game. Queen to f6. Now there's a threat of a pin once the knight moves, so you can't take it or you get pinned. And it's a little bit tricky, but tactically speaking, it's just a complete win for white. There's too many forks with the knight. The king is just too exposed. This one pawn makes a huge difference because it really defends white's king nicely. And here, Hikaru just resigned. So Fabiano wins. Really nice game. I mean, it's a little bit confusing when you look at this because there's like all this dancing around with the queens back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But basically, the key takeaway was that black's king didn't have shelter. And this knight became extremely strong. And notice how the bishop is kind of like just sitting over there, not really doing a whole lot, right? And so that was kind of the story of this game. So it's important to make sure you put your knight on the best square, even if you have to kind of relocate it, right? Like if we go all the way back here, the knight was a little bit misplaced, but that was a very easy fix. You go back to f1, you come over either to here or here, and next thing you know, it's ready to come in where it needs to be. Those are the games that I'm going to show you from round 1. Like I said, round 2 is currently underway. We will check that out very soon, so stay tuned for that. And then just also real quickly, the game Duda and Report was a draw. Here's the final position. I'm not going to show you that one, but I'll just keep you updated. They did get a draw. And then Rajabov and Firouzja was also a draw. Here was the final position. Here, just a rook ending. That turned out to be a draw. All right, guys, so I'll see you in the next recap. Don't forget, knight f6 has been played. It's your move. Comment below what you'd like to play, and I'll talk to you guys real soon. Stay sharp, play smart, take care.